Billionaire panics without a translator until Black Janitor shows up and does something amazing. In the crisis-filled corridors of corporate power, Harrison Blackwood's $18 billion empire faces its greatest threat when an emergency meeting with Chinese investors collides with his complete dependence on others for the linguistic skills that make global business possible. With his usual Mandarin interpreter hospitalized and billion-dollar contracts hanging in the balance, panic reveals the vulnerability beneath his confident exterior, until an unexpected source of salvation emerges from the most overlooked corner of his own building. Sometimes the most crucial discoveries await not in boardrooms or distant markets, but in the quiet competence of those who have been serving us while remaining invisible, their extraordinary capabilities hidden behind assumptions we never thought to question. Harrison Blackwood paced the gleaming marble floors of his Manhattan corporate headquarters, his $1,000 Italian shoes clicking against stone imported from quarries he owned in 3 different countries. At 48, his global mining empire was worth $18 billion, built through strategic acquisitions and an aggressive expansion into emerging markets that had made him one of the youngest billionaires in America. Tonight's emergency board meeting with Chinese investors represented the culmination of months of negotiations for a lithium deal that could secure his company's dominance in the electric vehicle battery market for the next decade. The contract required final signatures within hours, but his usual Mandarin interpreter had been hospitalized with a sudden heart attack, leaving Harrison facing the most important negotiation of his career without the linguistic bridge that had made his international success possible. His assistant had called every translation service in the city, but none could provide someone with the technical expertise needed for complex mining terminology at such short notice. The Chinese delegation had already arrived, their black sedans lined up outside his building like chess pieces positioned for strategic advantage. Chairman Wei Ling and his team represented interests worth hundreds of billions, their government connections making this deal crucial not just for Harrison's company, but for America's strategic mineral independence. Their interpreter spoke limited English, insufficient for the nuanced discussions that billion-dollar contracts required, while Harrison's Mandarin extended barely beyond basic greetings learned from language apps during his countless flights to Asia. The cultural importance of face-saving in Chinese business made the situation even more precarious. Admitting he couldn't communicate effectively would signal weakness that could destroy months of careful relationship building and cost him the deal that would cement his legacy as a visionary business leader rather than merely another wealthy inheritor of family resources. Panic crept into Harrison's usually confident demeanor as he realized that his empire, built on global communication and cross-cultural partnerships, was about to crumble due to a language barrier he had never seriously considered preparing for personally. His reliance on translators had been so complete that he had never developed backup plans for linguistic emergencies, never considered learning the languages of his most important business partners, never recognized that his international success depended entirely on other people's skills that he had taken for granted while claiming credit for the relationships they had actually facilitated. The irony wasn't lost on him that someone who prided himself on strategic thinking had overlooked the fundamental vulnerability created by depending on others for something so essential to his business operations, yet so foreign to his own capabilities and experience. His executive team gathered in the conference room, their expressions reflecting the same panic that Harrison was struggling to hide behind his usual mask of confident leadership. Vice presidents who commanded million-dollar salaries stood helplessly as the clock ticked toward a deadline that could reshape the entire company's future, their expertise in finance, legal affairs, and operations worthless without the ability to communicate with partners whose cultural and linguistic differences had never seemed like obstacles when professional interpreters smoothed every interaction. The situation revealed how completely Harrison's success had depended on invisible infrastructure of human skill and knowledge that he had never bothered to understand or appreciate, much less develop within himself or his senior leadership team. As Harrison's desperation reached its peak, Marcus Thompson entered the conference room with his usual quiet efficiency, emptying wastebaskets and replacing water bottles with the methodical precision that had characterized his work at Blackwood Industries for 12 years. At 55, Marcus had maintained the building's executive floors with dignity that transcended his modest role, his presence so familiar that most executives had stopped noticing him entirely despite his daily service to their comfort and productivity. His uniform was always immaculate, his demeanor respectful but self-possessed, carrying himself with quiet confidence that spoke of inner strength rather than deference to authority. Harrison barely glanced at him, too consumed with panic to acknowledge the man who had cleaned his office, organized his spaces, and observed his business operations with careful attention for over a decade of faithful service. The sound of Mandarin conversation drifted through the conference room doors as the Chinese delegation discussed their concerns among themselves, their voices carrying frustration about the communication difficulties that threatened to derail negotiations they had traveled halfway around the world to complete. Marcus paused in his work, his attention caught by familiar tones and linguistic patterns that transported him back to experiences Harrison could never have imagined. "Excuse me, Mr. Blackwood," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying unusual urgency that cut through Harrison's panic-induced tunnel vision. "I couldn't help but overhear the Chinese delegation speaking. They're concerned about the communication barrier and discussing whether they should postpone the meeting until tomorrow to allow time for proper translation arrangements." Harrison stopped pacing, his attention focusing on Marcus for perhaps the first time in their 12 years of professional intersection. "You understand what they're saying?" he asked, his voice carrying disbelief that someone he had categorized as building maintenance could possess skills relevant to his sophisticated international business operations. Marcus nodded simply, his response carrying dignity that neither apologized for his capabilities nor boasted about knowledge that contradicted Harrison's assumptions about his education and background. "I speak fluent Mandarin, Cantonese, and several regional dialects," Marcus explained matter-of-factly. "I studied linguistics in Beijing for 3 years and worked as a translator before circumstances brought me here." His words were carefully chosen, revealing competence while protecting privacy about life experiences that had led someone with advanced linguistic skills to work as building maintenance in corporate America. The revelation hit Harrison like a physical blow, forcing recognition that he had worked alongside someone whose abilities could solve his current crisis, yet whose potential he had never bothered to discover or acknowledge despite years of daily interaction. Marcus's offer to assist wasn't delivered with resentment about being overlooked, but with professional courtesy that focused on problem-solving rather than personal grievances about missed opportunities or wasted talents. "I would be happy to provide interpretation services for your meeting," Marcus continued, his tone suggesting this was a practical solution rather than a dramatic reversal of fortune. "I'm familiar with mining terminology from my previous work, and I understand the cultural protocols that make these negotiations successful." His words carried confidence born from experience rather than arrogance, offering expertise that could save Harrison's deal while maintaining the respectful boundaries that had characterized their previous professional relationship. The emergency interpretation session that followed became a masterclass in cross-cultural communication that revealed Marcus's extraordinary capabilities while exposing Harrison's dependence on skills he had never bothered to develop or deeply appreciate. Marcus moved seamlessly between languages with the fluency of someone who thought in multiple linguistic frameworks, his translations capturing not just literal meanings, but cultural nuances that made complex business concepts accessible to both sides. He explained technical mining processes in Mandarin with the same precision he used to clarify Chinese cultural expectations in English, his deep understanding of both languages allowing him to bridge gaps that went far beyond vocabulary to encompass completely different approaches to relationship building, negotiation, and business partnership that Harrison had never fully grasped despite years of international deal-making. Chairman Wei's response to Marcus's introduction was immediately positive, his recognition of linguistic competence combining with appreciation for someone who understood Chinese cultural values around respect, hierarchy, and the importance of personal relationships in business success. Marcus's ability to facilitate not just translation but genuine cultural exchange transformed the atmosphere in the conference room from tension and frustration to collaboration and mutual understanding. Harrison watched in amazement as conversations that had seemed impossible minutes earlier began flowing naturally, with Marcus serving as more than interpreter to become cultural bridge that allowed both sides to express their concerns, expectations, and visions for partnership in ways that honored their different approaches to business, while finding common ground for agreement. The technical aspects of the lithium mining deal required specialized vocabulary that Marcus handled with expertise that surprised even Harrison, who had assumed that complex industrial terminology would challenge someone whose current role involved building maintenance rather than international business. Marcus's explanations of extraction processes, environmental considerations, and market dynamics revealed knowledge that extended far beyond linguistic ability to encompass deep understanding of the mining industry that Harrison had never suspected despite their years of working in the same building. His questions and clarifications demonstrated not just translation skills, but analytical thinking that enhanced the conversation by ensuring all parties understood the technical and financial implications of the agreements they were negotiating. As the evening progressed, Harrison found himself relying on Marcus not just for language services, but for cultural insights that improved his own negotiation strategy and understanding of Chinese business priorities. Marcus's subtle guidance about appropriate timing for different topics, proper protocols for addressing Chairman Wei, and cultural context for Chinese concerns about environmental responsibility and community impact helped Harrison communicate more effectively than he had in previous international negotiations where he had focused solely on financial terms without understanding the broader context that shaped his partner's decision-making processes. The janitor who had been invisible in his building for 12 years was revealing himself as someone whose expertise could enhance Harrison's business operations in ways that transcended the current emergency to suggest possibilities for long-term collaboration and mutual benefit. The lithium mining contract was signed at 2 a.m, with terms more favorable than Harrison had dared hope when the evening began with what seemed like insurmountable communication barriers. Chairman Wei's satisfaction with the negotiations was evident in his warm farewell to Marcus, whose cultural competence had created the trust necessary for such a significant international partnership. The Chinese delegation expressed appreciation not just for the business terms, but for the respectful and thorough communication that had characterized their discussions, crediting Marcus's interpretation with creating understanding that went beyond mere translation to establish foundation for long-term business relationship built on mutual respect and clear communication about expectations and responsibilities. Harrison remained in his conference room after the Chinese delegation departed, processing the evening's events while Marcus quietly cleaned up the remnants of their successful negotiation. The $18 billion deal that had seemed impossible hours earlier was now secured, but Harrison's thoughts focused less on financial victory than on the profound revelation of capabilities that had existed unrecognized in his own building for over a decade. "Marcus," he said quietly, his voice carrying humility that was foreign to someone accustomed to commanding rather than requesting. "I owe you more than I can express. You saved not just tonight's deal, but probably my entire company's future in the Asian markets." His gratitude was genuine but incomplete, still processing the magnitude of what he had learned about assumption, oversight, and the human resources he had somehow failed to recognize despite their proximity and potential value. The conversation that followed revealed layers of Marcus's background that challenged every assumption Harrison had made about education, opportunity, and the factors that determined where people ended up in professional hierarchies. Marcus spoke about his linguistics degree from Beijing University, his previous work as a senior translator for multinational corporations, and the family medical crisis that had brought him back to America where his foreign credentials weren't recognized and economic necessity had led him to accept whatever employment was available while he rebuilt his life around caregiving responsibilities that prevented him from pursuing career advancement that would have utilized his exceptional skills and education. His story revealed systemic barriers that Harrison had never considered, structural obstacles that prevented qualified individuals from accessing opportunities that matched their capabilities simply because their credentials came from different educational systems or their life circumstances required flexibility that traditional career paths couldn't accommodate. Harrison's offer of a position as Director of International Relations was immediate and heartfelt, reflecting recognition that Marcus's skills were exactly what his company needed for continued global expansion. But the response revealed Marcus's character in ways that humbled Harrison further. Marcus's acceptance came with conditions that demonstrated wisdom about workplace dynamics, cultural integration, and the importance of earning respect through performance rather than simply receiving promotion through dramatic gesture. "I appreciate this opportunity," Marcus said thoughtfully, "but I prefer to prove myself gradually, to earn my colleagues' respect through demonstrated competence rather than sudden elevation that might create resentment or skepticism about my qualifications." His approach reflected understanding of organizational psychology that Harrison recognized as evidence of leadership potential that extended far beyond linguistic abilities to encompass emotional intelligence and strategic thinking about human relationships and institutional change. If stories of hidden talent and unexpected heroes inspire you, subscribe now so you never miss these incredible tales of people whose abilities transform lives when finally recognized. 6 months later, Marcus had established himself as Harrison's most valuable executive, his linguistic skills opening doors to markets that had been inaccessible, while his cultural insights prevented costly mistakes that could have damaged relationships with international partners. The International Relations Department he had built from scratch included diverse staff whose language abilities and cultural knowledge had transformed Blackwood Industries from an American company doing business abroad into a truly global organization that understood and respected the communities where it operated. Marcus's approach to hiring prioritized substance over credentials, competence over conventional backgrounds, creating opportunities for immigrants and first-generation Americans whose skills had been overlooked by traditional corporate recruitment that favored familiar educational pedigrees over actual abilities and cultural knowledge. Harrison's transformation was equally dramatic, his recognition of how completely he had overlooked Marcus's potential leading to systematic changes in how his company identified and developed talent. The executive training programs he implemented required all senior staff to spend time in operational roles, working alongside building maintenance, security, and support staff to understand their capabilities and perspectives rather than simply managing them as invisible infrastructure. His hiring practices evolved to prioritize diverse perspectives and unconventional backgrounds, understanding that innovation required different ways of thinking that couldn't be found by recruiting only from elite universities and traditional corporate pipelines that excluded extraordinary individuals whose life experiences had taken them through different educational and professional pathways. The company's international expansion accelerated dramatically under Marcus's guidance, with new partnerships in Southeast Asia, Africa, and South America that had been impossible when Harrison's team lacked the cultural competence necessary for respectful and effective cross-cultural business development. Each new market entry was managed with sensitivity to local customs, environmental concerns, and community impact that had been absent from Harrison's previous international ventures, creating sustainable business relationships that enhanced rather than exploited the regions where they operated. Marcus's influence extended beyond language services to encompass ethical business practices that aligned profit with positive social impact, demonstrating that responsible corporate behavior could enhance rather than limit financial success. Most significantly, the story of Marcus's recognition and advancement had inspired other companies to examine their own overlooked human resources, creating industry-wide awareness about the extraordinary capabilities that often remained hidden within organizations whose hiring and promotion practices reflected narrow assumptions about where talent could be found and how it should be credentialed. The business case for diversity and inclusion that Harrison now advocated was built not on social obligation, but on competitive advantage. understanding that companies that access the full spectrum of human capability would outperform those that limited themselves to traditional talent pipelines and conventional approaches to identifying and developing exceptional individuals. 3 years after that pivotal evening, when panic revealed the janitor who would transform his empire, Harrison stood before the United Nations Global Business Council, delivering a keynote address about the economic imperative of recognizing human potential wherever it appeared. Marcus sat in the front row, now Chief International Officer of Blackwood Industries, his journey from building maintenance to executive leadership serving as powerful example of what became possible when organizations looked beyond surface roles to discover the extraordinary capabilities that surrounded them daily. Their partnership had become legendary in business circles, not just for its dramatic origins, but for its demonstration that authentic collaboration across social boundaries could create competitive advantages that traditional corporate hierarchies couldn't access. This incredible journey from overlooked potential to executive leadership shows us that talent exists everywhere, waiting only for recognition and opportunity. If you believe in the power of seeing beyond assumptions to discover hidden capabilities, hit that subscribe button and share this story with someone who needs to remember that extraordinary abilities often come in unexpected packages. The scholarship program they had established together provided language training and cultural education for immigrants whose skills were underutilized in the American economy, creating pathways for integration that honored their existing capabilities while providing additional training that enhanced their competitiveness in professional markets. Hundreds of graduates now worked in positions that matched their abilities rather than merely their circumstances, their success stories multiplying the impact of Marcus's initial recognition beyond individual advancement to systemic change that benefited entire communities whose talents had been systematically overlooked by institutions that confused credentials with competence and familiarity with qualification. Harrison's memoir, The Janitor Who Saved My Empire, had become required reading in business schools worldwide. Its lessons about assumption, opportunity, and the hidden costs of organizational blindness influencing a generation of leaders to examine their own companies for overlooked talent and missed opportunities for innovation through inclusion. The book's success reflected broader cultural recognition that extraordinary capabilities existed throughout society, waiting only for leaders with the wisdom to look beyond surface appearances and the courage to challenge systems that prevented exceptional individuals from contributing their full potential to organizations and communities that needed their skills and perspectives. Most importantly, their story had become testament to the transformative power of recognition, proving that individual success could create ripple effects of positive change that extended far beyond personal advancement to encompass organizational transformation and social progress. Marcus's journey from invisible service worker to visible leader demonstrated that human potential couldn't be contained by circumstances, that dignity and excellence transcended any role, and that the most profound discoveries often awaited in the most familiar places when approached with curiosity rather than assumption, respect rather than dismissal, and the courage to see each person's full humanity regardless of their current position in social or economic hierarchies. Harrison and Marcus's partnership became proof that the most valuable assets in any organization are often the people we see every day but never truly notice, whose extraordinary capabilities wait patiently for recognition and opportunity. Their story reminds us that talent knows no boundaries of role or circumstance, that the next breakthrough, the crucial insight, the game-changing solution might be carried by the person whose potential we've never bothered to discover. In a world that often measures worth by position rather than capability, what remarkable transformations might await when we finally have the courage to see everyone's full potential. If you stayed until the end of this incredible story, comment "Hidden Genius Walks Among Us" below to show you witnessed this complete journey of recognition and transformation.